This week's episodes were brought to you by the generous support of Petrie Michaela. Hey folks, Quilly18 here, and welcome to a tutorial on how to make rebindable keybinds in Unity. Because, as you may or may not know, we're going to talk about this in a second, if you go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, this is generally where you go and you change your shortcut keys that respond to certain actions. You have named buttons like jump, and then you define how it's bound, like space. There's the ability to put in an alternative button in addition to a positive and a negative button, which wouldn't really matter for jump, but does for, say, left and right. You can also have the same button show up more than once in the list if you need additional keybinds. And that's swell, but there's not a real way to modify this at runtime. It's actually been something that people have asked for Unity in a long time, and they are working on a new, completely brand new, revised input manager. We don't know when that'll come out, though. But the case is, right now, there's no way for you to make any changes to these axes at runtime. Not just change the keybinds, but maybe tweak some of the other behavior, like the gravity and sensitivity and that. We're not here to do a tutorial on the input manager itself. We're here to generate our own. Now, you can change these when the program runs, normally. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and in the player settings over here, I believe it's I don't think it used to be called this, but the display resolution dialog box, this is a dialog that normally shows up when you launch a Unity program, lets you choose your resolution, your graphic quality, and lets you rebind some keys there. You can disable it completely, or have it be hidden by default, which means it won't come up unless you, I believe, hold Alt when you boot the program. But in any case, it doesn't let you change keys while the program is actually running, which is what we're going to be here for today. Now, this very, very simple little setup right now, I've got this quote-unquote character. It's a box, basically, with just a rigid body. Every time I hit space, it jumps up a little bit. I don't even check to see ground combat. Very simple code to work it over here. Purge that little space over there, and another one over here, actually. Why do I have both a fixed update and an update? It's because I'm just using the physics engine to move our character, and you should generally make changes to the physics inside of fixed update. Fixed update runs on every physics tick of the engine, which is why it's the right place to do this. However, this is not the same as every screen update, and it's during the screen update that the behavior of get button down / up or get key down / up works properly. You can use get button, just get button or get key inside a fixed update, because that just returns true or false whether a key is currently being held down. But get button down only returns true if the button was pushed down this frame and this frame only in the update style of frame, not the physics engine tick. And as a result, it's possible if you do this check for get button down inside of the physics engine tick, it's possible that you will miss some of those button presses. So we'll just split it up in here. Very sort of typical way to do that. That's fine. All right. So right now we are using the built-in Unity system, input.getButtonDown. We want to know if the button labeled jump, we don't know what the key is, but that's okay. We just want to know if the button labeled jump, which by default is spacebar and joystick button 3, if it went down this frame, in which case we set do jump equal true. We could have alternatively done something like if input, dot get key down, and then we wouldn't put in a label, we would rather put in, we want to put in a key code for, say, space like this, or, left Alt, if that's your jump key, that sort of thing. This is another way to do it, but of course this would be really hard coding in the key presses, which would be not as desirable. So we're going to, this is still the idea we want, but we, instead of calling the Unity input system directly, where we can't change the keybinds, we want to write our own, sort of just a little bit of a glue layer in between the two so that we can manage those key presses. So let's go and create ourselves a script, new C# script, and I'm going to call this input manager. So this is our input manager, and in the scene what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty object over here, and typically I would go and set this, numlock needs to be on, at 000, not that it matters, and I like to call this scripts, with like underscores to make it really obvious that this is something special. And this is just a place for me to hold scripts that don't really need a true and proper game object. So the scripts game object here in the scene has the input manager. That way it will be running. It's not the only way to do it, but it's actually a very common way to do this sort of thing. So now our scene will include an input manager, which will have a start, which will have an update that runs. I don't know why it's highlighting in red. There we go. I was going to say this should compile perfectly fine. So the role of this thing is, instead of going input.getButtonDown, I want to be able to say inputManager.getButtonDown, or something very similar to that, and to have the input manager have that map that goes from a named button, like jump, to the actual key. And to do that, I actually am going to set up, I think, a dictionary. So for the dictionary type, it is a generic collection, so we have to make sure we update our using line over here. And I want to create a dictionary that is something like, it's a string for the key, because again, that's going to be the name of the button, like jump, and it's going to point to a key code. And so this will be, I guess this will be the buttons? Button keys. There you go. That seems like a pretty fine name. So button keys over here, and in our start, of course, we're going to have to instantiate that. A new dictionary. And then what we could do is we could also set up some of our values. So I'm talking about doing something like, I guess I could use add, or you could just use the square brackets. Either way, I guess I'll use the square brackets. Looks kind of sexy. So we're going to make a button called jump, which by default is going to get bound to keycode.space. Now, with this setup over here, I'm currently only able to have one key per button. And this might be fine if you really want to have like 2 keys programmed at any given time for an action, which some games support. You got a few different options. You could make this an array of key codes, right, in your dictionary. That's fine. And then you would just, you know, set it up slightly differently over here and over here. Or maybe you could do a list of key codes. You know, that works fine as well. For simplicity, I think I'm just going to go for a single key code over here, but it really is not very hard to make a difference. A slight tweak in the UI, and I accidentally deleted an extra character over here. Are we good? Yes, I think we're good. Okay, so we got that. We could define an extra couple of buttons. We're not going to use them, but like we could have a left and a right, which by default would point to left arrow and right arrow. There we go. So we got a list of buttons in here that we're going to combine. This is just the initial setup. What you could do is something like to do. Consider reading these from a user preferences file, right? That way your changes persist if the player makes a change in the options, and then you save those, and then when you start the program, you read in from there. But that's an exercise for a different kind of tutorial. Okay. So we've got this in here, and what we want is we want some sort of public bool, I guess get button down, same as the default one, which means we take a string with the button name. That seems pretty fair. And then what we're going to do is, well, first, I guess we should probably make sure that this button exists first. So if our button keys dot contains key button name is equal to false. And yes, I could do the leading exclamation mark, but this makes it very explicit and clear. It's easy to miss the exclamation mark if you have it here for the not, whereas equal false makes it very explicit. So I guess we'll do something like debug.log error. I guess we do something like, we'll write it this way. Input manager, get button down, make it really clear what's going on. No button named and button name. Oops. That way, if someone comes in and asks for get button down, fire, well, we haven't defined a fire button yet, so clearly something is wrong over there. So we'll just do that, and then we'll return false, because we can't say that this button's being held down if we don't know what it is. We could also throw an exception in here. There's different possibilities. For our purposes, this is going to be okay here. So then all we do is when we then pass this request to the actual input manager, what we're going to return is a Boolean, which is going to be input based on get key down, and the key code is going to be from our button keys, button name, and we're going to return if that is true. If your key code, if your second part over here is actually an array, then what you'll have to do is loop through each one, and if any one of those buttons returns true to input.keyDown, then return true, otherwise do false. But here, we can very simply do this because we're now passing a key code to input.getKeyDown based on our little map. So that should be lovely. Let's go ahead and change our simple character over here to use input manager. Actually, we can't do it this way because input manager is a class and doesn't have a static function called get button down. We could go and implement that if you want. I guess that wouldn't be too hard, actually. But yeah, you know what? I think we'll leave that off. I don't want to go in and dirty up this tutorial with sort of singleton style code. So instead what we're going to do is over here, we're going to have a private variable inside of the simple character class called input manager. We're going to grab that in the start and say, hey, game object, I want you to find object of type. This is just going to find the very first thing of type input manager. If you have more than one in the scene, then something is terribly, terribly wrong. It'll just find the first one. But there you go. It'll find one called input manager. We'll save it in its variable. And then over here, we can just use this input manager variable, .get button down. And if it's true, then we will jump. So let's give this a try and see how that works. Hit play. Doot, 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 doot. Come on. There we go. Play. And there we go, same as before. I'm hitting the space bar, but it's using the input manager system instead of the Unity input key map. I mean, we still have to use input.get key down, but other than that, the map from a button to a key press is something that we are handling and we are managing, which means now we can take the next step, which is providing ourselves a little bit of a user interface for tuning that. So what we're going to need a couple of UI elements in the scene here. First, I'm going to start with an image. The image is going to be the base of my dialog box. The image just means, you know, we'll have a visible background. I'm going to give it a sprite of background, which is nice rounded corners. I will center this up. I'll give us a width of, I don't know, yeah, something like that, and a height of, I don't know, a little bit bigger. Something like this. Sure. We'll go with that. We're going to call this the Keybind dialog box. That seems okay. And we're going to throw a title in here just to make it look a little nicer. So we're going to throw some text. We're going to make sure that it's glued right to the very top. We're going to make sure the text is centered, and we're going to say Keybinds. That seems okay. We'll give you a little bit of, oops, I guess we need a negative. Let's say -4, give you a little bit of space. We're going to add a close button. So UI button, we're going to drag that to the top right corner. I'm going to change it to be 30 by 30, but hey, I'm 12 and this is funny. And the button text will simply be an X. So this is going to be the close button. And I guess we're going to need to pair this off with an open button, a way to open this window. So again, we'll add a new UI element to the root canvas itself. We're going to make it a button, and we're going to glue it to, say, the top left corner of the screen. And I'm going to call this, just relabel the button to Keybinds. And we're going to call this the open Keybinds button, just in our inspector, so we know what's what. All right, getting these starting buttons to work very, very quick and easy. What we're going to do is our close button over here. It's got an on-click routine down here. We're going to give it another listener. And what we're simply going to do is we're going to drag the Keybind dialog box into the object over here. And on that, we're just going to say to the game object directly, set active, and the checkbox over here is going to be blank. So we're going to say set active false when we hit the X over here. And for our open Keybinds button, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to, we need to go and add a new on-click event. We're going to drag the Keybind dialog box into there, go to game object. We're going to set to set active, but now we're going to tick on the checkbox so that we're saying set active is equal to true. And if we were to play this, then I can close the window, open the window, close, open. Hey, it's excellent. All right, that part is easy. Next thing what we want to do is we want to actually have, really the list of keybinds in here. Now, again, we're not going to do a UI tutorial here, so I'm not going to make like a scrolling list with the scroll bar, but this would definitely be a good situation for it. I am going to put in, I guess, an empty at this point. I'm going to call this one the, the key list. That seems fine. I'm going to get it to stretch for the entire view here, but then what I'm going to do is just bring it down below the buttons. So now we have this area happening in here. Actually, you know what? I will go ahead and make a vertical layout group in here. That's going to be okay. Do not expand the height. That's going to be fine. We'll probably want some padding and stuff too. And then inside of this, I'm going to create a new empty, called key list item. And in it, I'm going to add some text. And I just realized the height and width, I think we're going to have to add a layout element, to this and say, make sure to keep a minimum height of, like 30. There you go. That should be okay. Between not expanding the height and between setting a minimum height, this should ensure that our little element here that's going to be in our list will always be about 30 pixels high, and it should be the full width of the key list box. So this is the key list item. It's going to have a text label. I'm going to go and stick it by holding Alt and Shift over here. I'm hitting it on the right. I'm almost always holding Alt and Shift when I do these anchor sets, by the way. And I know I forget to mention it just because it's automatic to me. So I'm going to go and glue this to left-hand side center. We're also going to want to make sure that our text is vertically aligned over here inside of this list, so other than glued to the top. So this is going to be the label of our button. So this is going to be something like jump is what it's going to say. So I guess I'll rename this text to button name. There we go. So it's going to be jump as an example. And also in here, I'm going to create a button. And this is a button you're going to click when you want to start the rebind. And I guess I'll glue this to the right-hand side of the screen. And I'm going to... So this is the button label, but I'm going to rename this to something like key name. If you are doing the thing where you can have multiple buttons or multiple keys for a button, for an action, then you want two of these buttons and you want to track them separately. But again, that's not terribly hard. So this by default will say something like space, right, is the sort of thing we're looking at. And I think we're good there. I'm going to go in my key list. I'm going to add a little bit of padding. Say 4 characters or 4 pixels on the right and left, maybe top and bottom. And this key list item, first of all, this should be a prefab. And if I go and make a few, yeah, I was going to say, I think we're going to want a little bit of spacing between each element. Okay, that looks pretty nice. All right, so that's the idea. Let me get rid of these extra copies over here. And yeah, we're going to have a prefab because what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate multiple copies of this. We're going to instantiate one copy of this for each button in our input manager. So I think at this point, what we're going to do is on our Keybind dialog box, I'm going to create another script over here. I will call it Keybind dialog box. And I'm going to drag, as soon as it's done compiling, drag it onto this. There we go. And open this up. So the job of this thing is going to be two things. One, it's going to want to populate the dialog box over here with one entry per button. So that's pretty easy to do because what we're going to do, well, first of all, we're going to grab a reference to the input manager. Same as before, input manager, like that. And I'll just grab this code here. So now our Keybind dialog box will have a reference to the input manager. Now it's worth noting there's an interesting timing issue over here because what we're going to want to do is create one, what do we call that thing? Key list item. Create one key list item. Oh, I can't paste because mono behavior does that sometimes on PC. Per button in input manager. But right now we don't have a way to get the list of buttons in input manager because our dictionary here is currently protected by default. It's not public. Now we could make it public. That may or may not be a terrible thing in a small game, but let's go ahead and encapsulate this properly. What we're going to do is we're going to make a public function here, which is going to return an array of strings. We could also do a list or different things, but I think a string array is fine. And it's going to be something like get button names. It seems pretty straightforward. And all it's going to do is return all the button names. Now, what I want to be able to do very simply is say button keys dot keys, which is going to be strings in this case, dot to array, except we can't. Really, because this would not be an array by default. I mean, there's some casting and things you can do, but what makes life a lot easier in this situation is if you add a reference using system.link. Link adds a bunch of extra functions for managing data sets, including very, very cool stuff that's like quasi-database things. But more importantly, in our particular context, is it gives us the ability to quickly convert this key collection into an array of strings. And we're just going to go and return that. So now, excuse me, I'm going to die. Oh, man. Okay, I'm fine. Now over here, what we can do is something like button names is equal to input manager dot get button names. But again, there's a slight problem here because get button names requires or expects that button keys is instantiated, which only happens during our start routine over here. Well, if we're calling this in the start at the same time as here, there could be a conflict. Now, in practice, our Keybind dialog box is normally going to start disabled. When does start run? Start runs immediately before the very first time update is called, and it's never called for something that is disabled, or rather I should say inactive. Well, I guess both. If a component is disabled or a game object is inactive, update and therefore start will never be called. So in practice, since our dialog box will normally start closed. This will not run until well after the program has started, which means input manager will be set up. But for testing, we'll probably want to start with this window open so that we don't have to hit a button to get it going. And in any case, it highlights a potential problem. A couple of different ways around this. We could delay, some of this setup until update when we've confirmed that input manager is set up. There's a few different timing things we can go and tweak around. One of the easiest things to do in this particular situation, though, is to make use of onEnable. OnEnable is a function that, I didn't realize my formatting on my new stuff isn't quite matching. There we go. OnEnable is a function that runs the instant a game object becomes enabled. This is different from start because, again, start runs before the first time update gets run. So when update is going to run, the game object checks to see if start has ever been called. If it hasn't been called, then it starts start. It runs start. On the other hand, onEnable runs instantaneously when an object is enabled. And if we're talking about an object that is just enabled by default, as in all our current objects are, right? So this would be a disabled keybind dialog box. This is an enabled one. So if it's enabled and we hit play, then onEnable runs right away before start. It's also worth noting that onEnable will run every single time you re-enable an object, where start only ever runs once. So they have slightly different purposes. But in this case, we can take advantage of the timing here to get input manager to instantiate its button keys a dictionary early. In fact, what I'll even do is move this over to here. It's not the only solution. There's cleaner ways of doing it, but this is going to be perfectly fine. So we're going to instantiate onEnable, which will guarantee to run first. And then by the time start runs in our keybind dialog box, then this will be good and sorted out here. So that's good. All right. So we've got a list of button names over here. So what do we want to do? Well, we're going to have to go and get a game object called, I guess it's key item prefab. There we go. Something like this. This is going to be, it's going to be a public. And what we're going to do in our inspector here, as soon as this reloads, there we go, key item prefab. So the key list item, right, goes in there. This is the prefab. And so what we're going to do is something like this. We're going to say, I'm going to do a for each here, and it's actually going to cause a problem for us. But that's interesting because it's a good chance to talk about something. So we're going to have a slight problem with what I'm doing here. So for each, bn, button name, in button names, we're going to go and we're going to instantiate the key item prefab. Now, as of Unity version, we can actually set up a parent here right away. But in keeping with some of the older Unity stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for the object to be instantiated, then set up a parent. Now, right now, this will create a new game object with no parent whatsoever. If we want to set a parent, well, we're really going to have to keep a reference to it. So let's do this. And instantiate returns something that's a generic object type, so we do have to cast it to a game object over here to make everything okay. There we go. So we're going to instantiate that. Then we can do something like gameObject.transform.setParent to something. We could have done that in one step over here, but let's do it as an explicit second step because it's also going to give me a chance to talk about some other thing we're going to have to fix. So what is our parent supposed to be? Well, our parent is really supposed to be the key list over here. So again, we're going to need to reference that. So game object key list, make it public that way so that it will show up in the inspector of the keybind dialog box as soon as it compiles. Oh, no, I have a, oops, it's not compiling because I have an error. Let me just comment out this line, go back over here, wait for it. There it is. Okay, so we're just going to drag in the key list. And so now what we want to do is, for our new game object, we want to set the parent to be the keylist.transform. Like this. Now, if I try to run this, something funny may happen. It may be fine. Let's find out. All right, I guess we're okay. I was worried there might be a scaling problem, because sometimes there can be. Oh, I guess there wouldn't be because of my canvas scaler. So, depending on the mode of your canvas scaler over here, whether you're constant pixel size or you scale with screen size or constant physical size, depending on some of your overlay routines and different things like this, you can end up with bizarre scaling setup on your canvas over here. If in that situation, what can happen when you add new objects, when you instantiate new user interface objects like this, and then you assign them to a parent, their scale can go completely out of whack. And the best way to prevent that is after you set the parent here, go ahead with your new object, gameObject.transform.local scale, just reset it to the single, a 1 vector, a 1, 1, 1 vector, to reset the scale the way it should be. It's not required in this case because we don't have any funky scaling going on with the canvas, but you can sometimes run into this problem. Okay, anyway, enough about that. We are correctly going now, and when we run, it correctly sets up one button in here for every, or one entry in here for every button. Keep in mind, we have 3 buttons. We have jump, left, right, but of course, I have this outstanding key list item list here. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. So now we run, we'll correctly have exactly 3 created on the fly. Obviously, the labels aren't quite right though. So let's go ahead and fix that up. How are we going to do that? Well, as normal in my tutorials, I'm going to go a little heavy duty on our placeholder variables just to make things clear. What we're looking for is a text element. Oh, autocomplete didn't work correctly over here because if we're working in the UI, we need to add unityengine.ui as the namespace. Now I should be able to say text and be happy. So this is going to be the key name, or sorry, first we're going to start with the button name text element. And how are we going to grab that? Well, we're going to start with the transform here, and we can find something by name. And both of these are the identical signature, right? Yes, okay. I think find is the correct one, and find child is deprecated. So what we're looking for to start off with in our key list manager, we're looking for an object called button name. So find a child called button name, and it's going to have a component on it called text, and we're just going to grab that. Again, I'm being a little explicit. We could do it all as a one-liner, but that's okay. This doesn't create any extra garbage collection to worry about because it's just pointing to the same reference as before, or not any meaningful garbage collection. So this element has a property called text, and we can set that, in this case, I suppose, to bn, to the button name, right? This is our current button name. Set that to that. That's going to be great. Now we're going to do this one more time. Oh, my cursor went crazy. We're going to go one more time here, and in this case, we're going to go to, let me just bring it in here because we can't actually see it all. We're going to go to button/key name. So we're going to say we want button/key name. We're going to get that text element. So this is going to be the key name text, and we're going to set the key name text to something. Okay, let me just clean this up now. Don't want it in here. What are we going to set the key name text to? This is the thing that should be set to something like space, right? So we need to be able to get information, again, from this dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and get a public that's going to return a string, and it's going to be something like get key name for button. Now, again, if your setup allows multiple different types of, or multiple keys per button, multiple keys per button, then you'll probably need to set up, maybe return a string array, so get key names for button, or maybe you could pass some sort of index in here. But for our purposes, we can just go and say a single button name is going to be fine. And again, what we'll do is we'll do this little check to make sure that the button actually exists. Right? If there's no button name, then we return, I guess I'll return an A or something like that. Not applicable. So if there's no button with that name, but otherwise, then we can just return button name, button keys for button name dot toString, because this is a key code, but a key code is an enum, and an enum can be converted to a string, which will just stringify the name of the enum. So in this case, something like space, for example. So now we have this little helper function over here, which sounds great. So we're going to say input manager, could you get me the key name for a button? And the button name is bn. So we're going to set that label over there. Okay, let's run this and see what happens at this point. Hit play. There we go. Jump space, left is left arrow, right is right arrow. These buttons don't do anything yet, but we're getting very, 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 very close. And because our code is in start, it only generates this list once, no matter how many times you open and close it, which is fine because it's hard to imagine a situation where these keybinds would change by anything other than this dialog box. Although, if that were something that could happen instead of start, you might want to use on enable. Again, then you'd have to just keep some of these timing issues involved in mind or whatever. But for our purposes, I think this is good. Okay, so our buttons don't actually do anything. So the next step is to make the button work. So this is going to be the, well, just again, I'm being very explicit with these little variables here just to make things clearer, but we want the keybind button. And we can get a reference to it quite easily, which is this, and we can get the component for the button over here. And what we want to do is this keybind button has an on-click event handler over here. Which, and I mean, it is an event, you can add some things to it, but mostly what you're going to do is you're just going to add an extra listener rather than define extra events. You're just going to add an extra listener to this on-click, and this wants some sort of function in here. Basically, it's a delegate to a function that's basically a void that takes no parameters, and we feed it a function in there when the button gets pressed, because think about it, what we want is we want to hit play here, hit a button, and then what I want to be able to do is hit like H at this point. Rebind the jump key to H, and then when I push H, I want our little character to jump instead of having me hit spacebar. So what I'm going to do is really, we want some sort of function here called something like start rebind for, and it's going to have a button name. Now, this actually isn't going to do much, because what I want to do, it's tricky, but what we have to do is when we start doing the rebind mode, for now, what I'm just going to do is debug.log. I'll just have it spit out the button name so that we know that this button click is working. But we're going to want to start listening to the keyboard once this gets called, and the next time a key gets hit, we want to go and rebind that key at that time. So our keybind button over here, we're going to add a listener. Now, again, this wants a function with basically no properties whatsoever. We can't call start rebind for. If I had another function like this, void foo, I should be able to say, when the button gets hit, called foo. Here, let's try that. Debug.log foo. I believe this will work. Might be lying to you. Okay, it looks okay. Hit play, hit a button. There we go. Foo, 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 foo. That works okay. But I can't put start rebind for in here because, this should get us an error, because this requires us a string. So the signatures don't match. So how do we call start rebind for from here if we can't pass a string? Well, that's what delegates or anonymous functions and all kinds of different things, lambdas and yada yada. There's many, many methods to do it. But basically over here, I can create, this is a function. This is a function that takes no properties and will run whatever's in here. I can prove it to you. Debug.log hi. So this is just a function that's going to run that code. And now if we go over to Unity and I hit play and I hit this button, we'll get a hi. There you go. Hi. Over there. Just running that code. Well, we can make this a little bit more interesting because this can call other functions. And in this case, we can say start rebind for, and what it wants is a button name. So we have a button name, bn, like this. So now when we hit this button, it's going to call this function, that's then going to call another function inside and pass it a property. This is not quite going to work correctly. Hang on. I'm going to hit play. Now I'm going to hit the bottom one over here. See where it says right arrow? I hit this, and it says right. Oh, which is correct. Yes, yes, yes. Because what it's doing, it's calling start rebind for. I mean, I could make it more explicit here. Hold on. Start rebind for space plus button name, so we know exactly where we are. Let me get rid of the foo. We don't need that garbage anymore. Let me stop the program. Start it again. Hit here. There we go. Start rebind for right. And indeed, that's true. We are rebinding the right arrow. Now I'm going to hit this one. So it should say start rebind for jump. But it's not. It's going to say start rebind for right. Why is that? Well, when you do this, it binds this variable and sort of keeps it around. So whenever this button gets clicked, it's going to call this bit of code. But this bn here, bn is this variable over here. Basically, normally a variable that's declared within a function. So this is a variable that's being declared within the start function over here, right? Normally, as soon as this function would end right here, bn would go away. That variable would be gone, would be purged from memory. But in this case, we're keeping a reference to it that will get used whenever this button gets pushed. So this bn sticks around. The problem is bn here, and this becomes very, very, very obvious if I were to do something. How can I make this more obvious? All right, I know how I can make it more obvious. Instead of a for each here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a for loop. int I equals 0. I is less than button names dot length. I plus plus. Standard way to loop. And then what I'm going to do is outside of this, I'm going to have a variable called bn. And inside the loop, I'm going to set bn to be equal to button names I. This is the same, literally the same code that we had before, except we have an extra variable now that's explicit instead of having it be implicit within the for each, where it would sort of maintain this incrementer. But we have the same code. We loop through each button name, and then we set bn to be equal to the button name. If I go and run this, we're going to be exactly the same situation as before. Hit play. Right arrow says write, but the space button also says write. Okay. And that's because this is binding to this variable, which the first time through, bn gets set to jump. Then the second time through, it gets set to left. The third time through, it gets set to right. So we create this button. At the time we create this button listener, bn is equal to jump, but bn keeps changing, and all of these are pointing to the exact same instance of bn in memory. If we make one simple change, if we take the declaration of bn and move it inside the loop, every time this loop runs through, like for each iteration of I, so 3 times, this is a fresh new instance of bn. So the first time we run this bn is going to point to the bn that contains the word jump. Then the second time this runs, this is an entirely new bn. The old bn that points to jump still exists in memory, but this is a new bn which is going to point to left. And then the third time through, it's going to be another new bn that points to right. And that has to do with closure and things like that, if you can look up more information on it. But if we hit play, now it'll say jump, left, right. Perfect. Left, 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 jump, jump, jump. Excellent. There we go. All right. Sorry, a bit of an aside there, but it's very important. These things are incredibly useful in general. I love using sort of anonymous functions and lambdas all the time. And for particular for events and listeners like this is sort of what they're made to do. So now we get the start rebind for that gets past the button name. What are we going to do with it? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a string here called key to rebind. It's going to be a string. By default, this would be set to null. I can make it really explicit just as a memory thing. This starts being initialized to null, although this would be true even if I didn't say this explicitly. And over here, when we start a rebind for, we're just going to set key to rebind to be equal to this button name. That's literally all this function is going to do at this time. The real work is going to happen in update. In update, if key to rebind is not equal to null, then that means we're looking to rebind a key. So then we're going to ask the input system, hey, input system, was any key pushed down this frame? Not is any key down, but rather was any key pressed down this frame? This is a Boolean, true or false. It was. Which key was pressed down? And unfortunately, there's no way for us to get that information from input, as far as I know. There's just no way to get that information directly, because the input system is a gaming-oriented input system, which means it can handle multiple keys being pressed down at the same time. It's independent. It's not looking for typing. Well, you could fake it with sort of a fake input field to, get down the next key, different things like that. But I think that would actually be more cumbersome than the solution we're going to put in, which is going to feel a wee bit cumbersome to start off with, admittedly. So what we need to do is loop through all possible keys and see if it was pressed down. Feels a bit cumbersome, but actually runs really fast. And it's perfectly fine. How do we get the list of every single key? Well, key code is an enum, which contains all the possible keys in here. What we want to do is loop through each one of these. And that's actually very easy to do. However, there's one little gotcha in that the class we're going to use needs us to include the system namespace. Or I suppose we could go system.whatever, that'd be fine, but it's a little easier. Using system, now you'll be able to access enum capital E. Not lowercase enum, but uppercase enum. It has a static function called getNames or getValues. GetValues would return an array of, I guess, the integers, but we want getNames in here. Basically, this is going to return an array of strings. Sorry, I'm wrong. GetNames is very cool. It returns an array of strings, but we actually do want just the values. We want an array of every possible value of our key code enum. Now, this actually requires us to pass it a type, so we need to say type of key code. So what this will do is this will return every possible key code that can exist. So basically, it should return an array of key codes like this. Again, I'll be very explicit and I'll make some extra placeholder variables, not strictly necessary, but it's fine. And then basically what we're doing here is saying for each key code KC in KCS, is this key down? If input.get key down for key code, then yes. So then we rebind the key, which means in input manager, we once again need another public function. Public void set button for key. So it's going to take a string, which is the button name. It's going to take a key code, which is the new key code. And we don't even have to check to see that it's in the database, because we could also use this as a way to just add new buttons. Basically, we're going to say button keys button name is equal to key code here. So this can be used to create a new key if we want. Or maybe you want to check, maybe you want two variants so that you can check to see if it exists and not create new ones sometimes. But this is going to be fine. So all we're going to do here is say, okay, well, input manager, input manager dot set button for key. So the button name is the, right, sorry. You know where it says key to rebind? This is inaccurate. This is button to rebind. My bad. So the button name is button to rebind, and the key is going to be the current key that we're in, and that's it. And then we can break out of this loop. We found, we can break out of the for each loop. We found the key we're looking to reset, and there we go. So let's give this a try. We're going to go here. We're going to find out that we've got an error. Return system.array as opposed to an actual array. But I suppose I could do an explicit conversion with the link. I guess I can just do this. Then you'll stop complaining, right? Yeah, you will. I know it feels a little awkward. I'm not used to using that. Normally what I'd actually do is just this. There we go. That gets rid of that whole question in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. Then I'm going to hit H. Now, it doesn't update the keybind list, but if we've done it right, H should now make my character jump. Oh, you know what? I rebound it to the mouse click accidentally. Oh, right. Because we also need to say to stop rebinding keys. But yeah, mouse buttons are also keys. So they can respond to that. So there you go. Stop that. Now let's try this again. Hit play. Hit here. I'm going to hit H. I'm going to close this window, and I'm hitting H on the keyboard. This is me hitting H. I'm not going to hit space. Nothing happens. H works. Awesome. But probably what we would like it is when we hit H over here, it should really update this label, shouldn't it? So what we're going to do is I'm going to go and create a dictionary. Oops, which means I need to include generics. And include a dictionary, which is going to be button to label map, basically. So it's going to take a string, which is the button name, and it's going to take the second thing is going to be a UI text, like that. I did this wrong. That goes here. Excellent. So we're going to make sure it's got a new dictionary over here. And over here, the button name text, so we're going to make sure in a button to label, we're going to set for button name BN, we're going to map to this UI text element over here. And then what I can do over here when we rebind the key is for the button with this name, we want to set the text to be equal to the key to string. So let me go and hit play here. So now, assuming I've done that right, when I click here and hit H, whoops, changing the wrong label here. It's the key label. There we go. So it's key to label, I suppose, but hit this, now hit H. Yeah, last time it replaced jump with H, but there we go. Hit this again, go left alt, yeah, control, excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this and hit left control. Hey, there we go, it works fine. reopen this. Say I want L. L is my jump key, clearly. And there it goes, perfectly fine as well. Lovely. The one nice thing about the input manager like this too, the fact that we've got a glue layer in the middle, it means it would be very easy in the input manager when we are checking to see if get button down, you could do something like check to see if the game is supposed to be paused. You know, little things like that. Or maybe if you're in a different input mode, like window is open, or if the player is typing in a text box. For example, that's actually a problem I have in RimWorld. When I'm renaming a character, the game keys are still working. So every time I backspace in RimWorld, like when I'm typing a character name in the input field, my view goes around because backspace is also a hotkey to cycle your view between each player or each character in the game, for example. So by putting in a little check in here, we can go and just automatically return false. Ignore that this button is not being held down if we're in a mode where button presses should not be affecting game characters, for example. So you got little fun things like that. Anyway, I hope you find this tutorial handy. This, I mean, there's a lot more details you can sort of throw in. Again, multiple keys, this and that. Oh, and again, by default, you'd want this dialog box to start turned off, which makes a lot more sense. And then you go click here, do this, set it to F. There we are. Good stuff. But you've got a key manager in here, and you've got not only the ability to rebind keys, but the ability to have more intelligent and automated behavior for your key presses. It minimizes how often you've got to do checks, say, in simple character over here. In your simple character, you don't have to do a bunch of, well, if this and that and that and that, then I'll check to see if the button is being pushed down. Instead, you can just call it directly. I mean, you still might want to check in here for like a pause state or whatever, because you'll probably want to halt the physics or do some damn thing. I don't know. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to all our September patrons, i.e. people who've pledged in September and are supporting the videos from October to early November, and especially these Mike Check supporters. We've got Yuko Finn, Ole Peter Talgo, Adam Conway, Drazian, Jan Torrevel, Adjective, Michael McClintock, Aaron Doibson, Craig Mortel, Stephen Wendell, Julien Auger Lafont, Marius Fieldvold, Speedy Savant, Steven Stager, Valiant Cake Fiend, Wes Olenboving, Jason Yanity, Kale the Quick, Neil Blakey Milner, and everyone who's watched, shared, favored, and subscribed to the series. Thank you very, very much.